Please like and subscribe. The Ukrainian-Russian war began in February 2022 when Russia launched an invasion of Ukraine. The world watched as tensions escalated and fighting intensified, causing widespread destruction and suffering. The conflict was marked by vicious battles and devastating losses on both sides. As the war continued, it became clear that the conflict was more than just a military battle between two countries. It was a clash of ideologies and values, a fight for freedom and sovereignty. The Ukrainian people, who had long suffered under Russian influence and interference, were determined to resist the Russian aggression. The Ukrainian army, aided by support from the United States and other Western powers, fought fiercely to defend their land and their people. Despite the overwhelming firepower of the Russian military, the Ukrainian forces were able to hold their ground and even push back against the Russian advance. As the war dragged on, it became clear that the Ukrainian people were deeply committed to their independence and sovereignty. They had suffered too much under Russian rule, and they were determined to fight for their freedom. Meanwhile, Russian public opinion remained largely in support of the war, even as the country suffered from economic sanctions and isolation from the international community. The conflict took a heavy toll on both sides, with hundreds of thousands of people killed, injured, or displaced. The destruction of homes, infrastructure, and businesses left many struggling to survive. However, despite the enormous challenges they faced, the Ukrainian people remained resilient and determined to rebuild their country. As the war entered its second year, there were signs that the conflict may be starting to wind down. Russian forces had suffered heavy losses and were facing increasing resistance from the Ukrainian military. Meanwhile, international pressure on Russia was mounting, with sanctions and condemnation from the global community. However, there were also concerns that the conflict could escalate further, with the possibility of a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia. The risk of a wider conflict was a constant concern, with tensions between the two countries remaining high. Despite the challenges, the Ukrainian people remained hopeful for the future. They had shown remarkable courage and resilience in the face of adversity, and they were determined to rebuild their country and create a better future for themselves and their children. The war had been a terrible tragedy, but it had also shown the world the strength and determination of the Ukrainian people. In the end, the conflict would be remembered as a turning point in Ukrainian history, a moment when the country stood up to defend its sovereignty and independence. It would be a long road to recovery, but the Ukrainian people were determined to build a brighter future for themselves and their country. They had faced the worst that war could throw at them, but they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. As the weeks passed, the Ukrainian military continued to hold the line against the Russian invasion, with the help of substantial military aid from the United States and other Western countries. The fighting was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite this, the Ukrainian soldiers held their ground and refused to give up. As the conflict dragged on, it became clear that the situation was not sustainable. The Ukrainian economy was in shambles, and the country was struggling to cope with a huge number of refugees who had fled the fighting. Meanwhile, the Russian military had not been able to achieve its objectives and was facing mounting casualties and supply problems. In the end, it was a combination of factors that brought about a ceasefire agreement. The United States and Russia, both exhausted by the conflict, began to negotiate a settlement. Meanwhile, pressure from the international community, including the United Nations and the European Union, pushed both sides to the negotiating table. The ceasefire agreement was signed in September 2023, and it included provisions for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory, the return of captured territory to Ukraine, and the establishment of a demilitarized zone along the border. In addition, both sides agreed to work towards a lasting peace settlement, which would address the underlying causes of the conflict and provide a framework for reconciliation and cooperation between Ukraine and Russia. The aftermath of the war was a time of great change and uncertainty for Ukraine. The country faced the daunting task of rebuilding its economy, infrastructure, and society, while also addressing the deep-seated political and social divisions that had contributed to the conflict. At the same time, Ukraine was forced to confront the fact that it could no longer rely on the West to provide it with unlimited military and financial support. Despite these challenges, there were reasons for hope. The ceasefire agreement had brought an end to the fighting, and the Ukrainian people had shown great resilience and determination in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, there were signs that Russia was beginning to rethink its aggressive stance towards Ukraine and was looking for ways to engage with its neighbor in a more constructive manner. As Ukraine began the long process of rebuilding and recovery, there were many who wondered what the future would hold. Some feared that the country would remain trapped in a cycle of conflict and instability, while others saw the potential for a new era of peace, prosperity, and cooperation between Ukraine and Russia. Only time would tell what the future held for Ukraine and its people, but one thing was clear: the scars of the Ukraine-Russian war would take a long time to heal, and the memory of the conflict would continue to shape the country for many years to come. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.